What's up, guys? My name is Witty, of course, and forgive the voice, I'm actually a little sick right now, but let's go ahead and jump into this video. We are going to be talking about my Chain Lightning Sorceress build for Season 5 of Diablo IV. This build is able to clear all content uncontested. The only downside is when in a single target boss situation, it can tend to be a little bit slower, which is sped up significantly when either running in a group with a friend or, of course, having a few adds at the boss. Now, this isn't exactly a glaring issue. You're definitely still able to kill the bosses. For example, all of the bosses at the end of a compass in Infernal Hordes, tier 7 or even 8, you can kill them 100%. It's just going to take you a little bit of time. You're going to have a full guide for leveling with this build because this is what I made prior to Season 5 and ended up running. It does take a lot of inspiration from a bunch of different builds that I kind of meshed together and formed my own little Frankenstein build that I found worked incredibly well and is still working incredibly well for me to date. So, starting out, we are going to be using Incinerate with Hydra, and this is mostly for leveling. As far as the aspects go that are in this planner, you actually just want to get whatever you can. The more of these you have, the better, but it is not required by any means for you to have all of them. They are just all helpful in their own way, and I would personally recommend getting as many of them as you can, but if you miss 80% of them, it really isn't that big of a deal. The only real important ones, I would say, are like flamethrowers, which of course is what makes Incinerate shoot 3 beams instead of 1. That is mostly for AoE purposes. Elementalist is very useful as well because of the increased crit chance with core skills, considering we're using one of those. And last but not least, Conflagration, which I feel like I'm mispronouncing, but maybe that's because I just woke up. This one is very useful as well. You get a lot of extra little explosions from Incinerate, and of course, it's just multiplicative burning damage, which is always great. Once we have hit level 55, which essentially just means we can equip ancestral items, we move on to the middle game, where we have essentially the exact same thing. The only difference here is we have started to do Hordes, and hopefully we have some friends we're doing them with, but if not, that's okay. You can ignore the masterwork part of this. The idea is to start to work on masterworking. I actually didn't select any option for where you should go as far as masterworking goes, because you're not going to be resetting at this point if you somehow manage to get the mats to masterwork. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to have extras unless someone is carrying you, to which case I would assume you already know a little bit about the game and what you're doing. Now, there are some obvious glaring things. For example, on your wand and your focus, you probably want to go for crit damage because you're going to be critting quite a bit. On your boots, you would want to go for movement speed. On your pants, you would maybe want armor if that's something you need. You should be able to figure these things out. Your main goal while in the leveling process is to keep your defenses as high as possible. So keep your damage reduction up, keep your armor capped out at 9,230, and of course keep your resistances as high as you can get them, up to 70%. This build as it sits right now is looking pretty healthy as far as resistances go. This should be more than enough to survive the World Tier 3, World Tier 4 transition, and even plenty of World Tier 4 content. You can also always use some incenses to boost the rest of your resistances up if it is needed. Moving on to the late game, at level 80, when you're able to wear 925 items and all that fun stuff, we make the transition to Chain Lightning, and this is where this build really picks up as far as I'm concerned. Now, there are a lot of things you can swap into this build. For example, our amulet, as you can see, it is running percent intelligence, devouring blaze, and critical strike chance, with a tempering that has unstable currents cooldown and crit damage, of course. This is 100% swappable for something like Lockrens, which gives you a 40% crit strike chance, and that's really useful. But again, I personally found that the legendary amulet is much stronger at the end of the day, just because we have the aspect boost, we have the tempering, we have the ranks to devouring blaze. All of these things are very useful, and if you look at devouring blaze here, Every single point of this is going to be 7% multiplicative increased critical strike damage, and our critical strike damage is over 1,500. So we're going to want to have as many boosts to that as possible, and a nearly 50% multi increase to that is very, very strong. It is probably the best skill to actually get extra points in on your amulet, so for that reason, I would personally recommend a legendary amulet, but Lockrins is 100% usable, and it is pretty common to get from the Infernal Hordes chests, so use what you would like here. If it feels good, which it probably will with this build, use it. It'll work. It's all good. We don't really need a lot of attack speed. This is about the only place we actually grab it, and we'll touch on that again in the end game part. We also run accelerating at some point. Right here it is. That, of course, will speed up your attack speed by another 25% every time you crit, because you're using Chain Lightning, which is a core skill. Having 2 attack speed rolls and obtaining the accelerating bonus makes you cast like a madman. So it is perfectly fine at that point, but I am sure you can get this a lot faster. Moving on to the endgame version, we will touch on attack speed very quickly. It isn't really something I'd focus on masterworking, but again, I did keep it here, and I kept it on the gloves. Obviously, we're still running accelerating, so that's going to help a lot. We are running a Shaco as well as a Tyrael Smite, and the masterworking is not crucial on either of these pieces. You don't need to have the cooldown, triple critted or anything like that. You basically want to land on anything but armor here, and you'll be okay. More cooldown is always good because we want this unstable currents cooldown to be as low as possible, as well as our teleports and all that fun stuff, of course. But if you don't hit triple crit, it is not the end of the world on this build. I didn't even have Masterworks for the longest time on either of these mythic uniques, so do not worry about it too much. It is very laid back still. As far as Tyrael's goes, you can land on pretty much anything here except for resistance to all elements, because just with Tyrael's and your amulet and maybe the boots, which also give another 14.5, you are res capped in World Tier 4. You can see we are at 84.6, and that is why we go ahead and get a greater affixed Tyrael's with that stat. If that's not something you can find, you could just as easily lose a point and do something like this, or even go for 2 here and get the exact same thing. However you can make this work to get to around 85%. 85% is the hard cap, period. You cannot go above that with incense or anything, so if you can manage to get to this 84.6, you're looking good. That's all you really need to do. So in a perfect world, we end up with something like this, and the reason we want movement speed is because of our Esu's Heirloom, which of course boosts our crit chance by 40% of our movement speed. As you can see here, it is going to be 30.5% currently. That is a lot to do with the fact that in-game, I actually run movement speed instead of crit strike chance, and I have a movement speed temper instead of crit strike damage, just for the extra movement speed to buff Esu's up to around 50 or 55, and this gets me much closer, if not at 100% crit strike chance, and you can see why that would be a good thing considering we are stacking up crit damage. Outside of that, we are of course running Tal Rasha's. This is something you can not worry about, and you can equip it as soon as you get it. It doesn't matter what it replaces, it needs to be on. Now, ideally you would have Prodigies as your other ring, because you do want all of that mana restore. You can also actually run Recharging, if I can search it up here. And this essentially gives you 3 mana every time that Chain Lightning bounces. And trust me when I tell you, it bounces a lot. So this is noticeable. You will definitely upkeep your mana with this as well. But Prodigies, you're spamming your cooldowns all the same. So I actually use Recharging myself, but both are great. And the last unique is of course the staple, the Axial Conduit. This is going to have our Chain Lightning orbiting around us and shooting out at enemies, and this is what allows you to essentially walk around and annihilate everything without even casting a skill. You essentially cast a couple preemptive Chain Lightnings and then walk for about 5 seconds, and everything just dies around you. It's very nice. You need this for the build. In a perfect world, you have 2 greater affixes here to get +8 to Chain Lightning, and we end up with 25 ranks and a base 150% multiplicative damage. This build is very, very smooth. Very, very nice. I've really been enjoying myself with it. As you can see, I'm actually running Glass Cannon because I haven't found the right amulet yet. This build is capable of soloing at least tier 7 Hordes. I did that and it took around 15 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more. Obviously, I'm not fully masterworked and you can go much higher. Generally speaking, all around, this is what you're looking for. And if you happen to get a Ring of Starless Skies, you can hot swap that in instead of recharging or prodigies here, and that will work beautifully as well. I hope you all enjoy this build because it is very, very fun to play, and it is the best AoE build that I have seen in this game. Not even just this season, just the game as a whole. Whirlwind Dust Devils was incredibly fun in Season 4, but I think even then, this would have cleared it as far as AoE goes, and it may have even been faster if we were to run the Teleport Enchant, which, speaking of enchants, we can actually talk about that a little bit. We run Firebolt, so everything is burning. And then we have Lightning Spear. This essentially is just going to do more damage. You can substitute this one out if you're going to substitute one. A lot of the options would be, Ice Blades, for example. This will help with your cooldowns if you don't have enough cooldown reduction. You can also use Teleport, which replaces your Evade and allows you to teleport a second time, essentially. This is very, very useful for speed content if you're rushing through Nightmare Dungeons or doing Helltide or something of that nature. It's also even good defensively, if you need to get out of a sticky situation. Teleport is, of course, great, and having a second one is even better. Without further ado, we're going to jump out of this video. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one, and hopefully you enjoyed this fun little build. Peace.